Hi everyone. My name's Kieran Hyder. You might notice I'm not the first author on this presentation. There might be a bit of a theme going on during this week about the presentations I've got to do. So I picked up quite a lot of presentations for people that from my group that couldn't unfortunately get the funding to attend. So what I'm going to talk about today is a spatially explicit individual-based model to support management of commercial and recreational fishing. So what I'm going to talk about briefly is I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about the European sea bass. For those of you that aren't from Europe, you're probably not aware of it or what it's like, but there's a couple on there in the fish box. Those are quite big ones. I'm going to talk about the modelling approach, and then I'm going to talk about the two different types of IBMs that we've got. First one that's looking at the pelagic phase, so trying to understand the connectivity between spawning areas and nursery grounds, and the levels of settlement that we have, and then having a look at how we integrate that in an adult phase model to test management measures. So, European sea bass, for those of you that don't know, it's a slow-growing, high-value commercial and recreational target fish. It can get to about 30 years old, up to about a metre long, and females don't really mature until they're about 5 years old, generally. Oh, there we go. Someone's, I can hear an echo in here. But, yes, so there's large interannual variation in recruitment, and we think that this is very much driven by the environment. If you try and come up with a relationship between stock and recruitment, it doesn't really work until you put temperature in. So, it's a southern species, it's moving north, and it tends to do well in warm years and badly in cold years. And the third thing is that the spawning stock biomass declined rapidly between about 2009 and 2019 or 18, that rapid decline that you can see in this last one, the spawning stock biomass kind of falling off a cliff, and that led to, in 2015, a whole load of management measures were introduced for both the commercial and the recreational sector. Before then, it was pretty much unmanaged, apart from things like minimum landing sizes. So, the exam question is really how should we manage this stock, and can individual-based models be used to test some of these management strategies? So, there's a modeller's view of a fish. Basically, you've got a life cycle where you've got eggs and larvae in the pelagic phase. And then you've got juveniles that inhabit nursery grounds close to the coast, and then they kind of move on to adults that migrate quite long distances. So what we thought we'd do is we'd kind of split these two things in half. And the reason for doing that is really around the computational efficiency. So the top side of things, where we're running large-scale hydrodynamic models and particle tracking within those hydrodynamic models, they require supercomputers to run them, and are very resource intensive. And if you tried to actually link that to an adult model in real time, essentially you wouldn't be able to run the numbers of scenarios that you needed from a management perspective. So what we've done is we've decoupled those two processes. We come up with matrices of connectivity from the hydrodynamic pelagic phase models that we then build into our adult models to allocate our settlement and recruitment to different areas. So from the pelagic phase, we have a hydrodynamic model with particle tracking and behaviour to predict settlement and connectivity. And the adult side, we have a spatially explicit individual-based model, which includes key processes like spawning, growth, mortality, and migration, and we use that to assess our management. So the pelagic phase IBM, I'm going to not really go into a massive amount of detail about either of the IBMs, but just give you a bit of a flavour about how they work. So this This figure on the right hand side is the domain of our hydrodynamic model, and the dots on there are the areas where we release particles from every 3 days in the period between February and July. And then we use we follow all of those particles. We come up with individual tracks of where they start and where they end over time. And we have temperature dependent development in those kind of things and behavior at the different stages. So we've got egg and larval stages in those models. The eggs are released February to July. The spawning, as I say, is growth and temperature dependent. We have mortality in there as well. And then we try and calibrate it in 2 ways. We've got the variation that's generated from assessments, so the age naught recruitment from assessments, and we've got data from 7 different estuaries. So you can see the different letters on this picture over here. So what do we find when we do that? So we found that we could get reasonable predictions out of the model. We get similar kind of effects to what you see in the stock assessment recruitment time series, but the predictions are higher in 2018 and lower in 1997. The estuaries, we found that we could get good predictions in some areas, but we overpredict or underpredict recruitment in other years for some reason, in other regions, and the differences between what we see and reality are driven by a combination of different things, whether it's the physical environment, the biology, for example, the spawning, the behavior, the mortality, or there's also quite a lot of uncertainty in the data itself as well. So some of you've got issues with the models and you've got issues with the data. So what you can see though from the outputs that we get on this side, these are the connectivity matrices that we use in the adult model. On each side you've got the kind of different areas, and you can see the different areas in this picture down here, and we look at connectivity between these. So anything that's on the diagonal is basically self-seeding. It's stuff that's coming from a particular area that then settles in that area. And what you can see is that the majority is down that diagonal, but you do have some kind of transfer from different regions, and that's quite important when it comes to the stock structures that we're dealing with. And what we're doing next is we're actually moving on to start to look at detailed analyses of individual estuaries. If you're interested, we've just published this work in Frontiers in Marine Science, so you can go and have a look and see more about it. So we take those connectivity matrices and we add them to an adult phase individual-based model. And what we have is a model for the northern stock, which is this area that you can see here. It's kind of up to about there on the thing. We have drivers in this model that are based on the temperature. So that's the top one, but we also have an energy budget model which is driven by the phytoplankton that's in there as well. So that is our proxy for food, and we get that from remote sense data. So we have we use, as I say, the pelagic phase that we've just seen to distribute settlement, and we model the growth of each of the individuals. The mortality, and that mortality comprises of either natural mortality, commercial fishing or recreational fishing, and we have lots of movement in there because these fish swim quite long distances, and reproduction. And then we do something that's very clever with calibration. We use a kind of approximate Bayesian computation, which means that we can calibrate these models but in quite an efficient manner. And then the way that we look at whether it works or not, we look at the spatial distributions and the catch limits. So these are some pictures of some of the model calibrations. You've got the data points in black and the model outputs in red. For the spawning stock biomass, we're kind of all right. And we can compare the fish weight at age, and we're a little bit under predicting there. But we felt that we had reasonable fits against the thing, so we can move on and and start to look at the model and what it does. And we publish this output in the paper that's at the bottom of the page. So what we can see here, if I can make it run, is we can actually... is that working? Oh yeah, here we go. So this is my lovely movie of our fish. You can see here, so the different colours of the temperature as they increase. You've basically got 5 different substocks, which are the different colours. You've got some very small fish, which are the kind of the young of year, and then you've got some slightly bigger juveniles. And the green areas and the nursery area patterns. And you can see that was a whole year of simulation. You can see that they come out into the southwest to spawn, and they spread up to where they feed. As the temperature increases, you can see the juveniles kind of hanging around in amongst the coast, and then they'll come back out to spawn. One of the issues that we have is that sea bass are not really caught very well in any of our surveys. So we don't have any fisheries independent data. And a lot of the fisheries that we have aren't targeted as well. So they're bycatch fisheries. So we don't have very much information on what the overall kind of population structure and the biomass, the spatial distribution of the biomass is. So we can use the model to actually start to understand where the spatial patterns of biomass may be over time. So, you know, we can see that in Q1, so I think that's January to March, the spatial biomass is really down in the southwest, and then it spreads through spring and summer up into the Irish Sea and up to the northwest, and kind of distributes around through winter before it starts to move back down towards the southwest again. So this is quite interesting because it helps us to start think about how we might manage stuff spatially, and we can start to ask questions about real-time closures. The other thing that we can start to do is we can actually start to predict landings of things based on the spatial effort that we see. So these are the official landings, and these are the landings that we predict from the model. In fact, we're not taking into account effort in this side of things. We're actually just talking about catch equations that just look at the biomass and then take out a certain proportion in each area. So you can see we do get the kind of major concentration in the southwest and up into the east, all right, but we seem to be over predicting in this area. So we're kind of working on the IBM to try and move us towards being able to predict better. But at a UK level, we're starting to think more about regional management around the UK and different populations. At the moment, this is just one big population, but we're thinking about maybe a set of meta-populations that are interconnected, and you may end up with different types of management approaches in each of those regions. So this is the kind of modelling type approach spatially that you would need to start to think about those kind of things. So we're really setting ourselves up for the future. So in summary, basically we can see that sea bass's management is quite complex, it's quite challenging. We've got complex biology, fisheries, and we've got the stock declining recently. The IBM approach allows us to kind of model a phenomenon not included in the current population models that we have, so the spatial component of it, and they can be used to test the performance of management strategies. And that was all I was going to say. Thank you very much.